My name is Michael Thompson. I'm 32 years old, and I work as a financial analyst in Chicago. 6 years ago, I believed I'd found the woman I would spend the rest of my life with. Her name was Lydia Miller, and she came from what most people would call an upper-middle-class family that owned a successful Italian restaurant in Lincoln Park. Looking back now, I can see the red flags had always been there, waving quietly in the background, but I chose to ignore them because I was in love. Lydia's parents, Jack and Donna Miller, were the kind of people who carried their success like a badge of superiority. They loved to flaunt their wealth and status, laughed at others with a kind of cruel amusement, and never once showed genuine gratitude, especially not for what my mother had done for them years before. My mother, Patricia Thompson, was a saint in every sense of the word, selfless, kind, and generous to a fault. Back in 2018, when the Miller family's restaurant was on the verge of collapse after a string of poor investments and the economic downturn, it was my mother who stepped in to save them. She co-signed a $70,000 bank loan that kept their doors open, and when that wasn't enough, she dipped into her own retirement savings to buy them a $15,000 industrial oven. She even went so far as to pay $28,000 for Lydia's younger brother's senior year tuition at Northwestern University when he nearly had to drop out. Every cent of it is documented, bank records, receipts, emails, because my mother kept everything meticulously organized. That's just who she was, honest, disciplined, and unwavering in her integrity. But what truly aided me over the years wasn't the money. It was their silence. The Millers never acknowledged her kindness, never offered a word of thanks, never once mentioned her sacrifice in public. It was as if they'd erased her from their history, rewriting their story to make it seem like they'd saved themselves through clever business decisions. It stung deeply, but I kept my peace. I loved Lydia, and I didn't want her parents' arrogance to poison what we had. I told myself they were her burden, not mine. Even when Lydia refused to include a small tribute to my late mother during our wedding ceremony, claiming it would make the event too depressing, I swallowed my pride. My mom had passed away just 8 months earlier, and I thought it would be beautiful to honor her memory on such an important day. But Lydia's coldness should have been my wake-up call. Love makes fools of us all, and I was blind to what was coming. The rehearsal dinner took place at the Miller's restaurant, the very same one my mother had saved from bankruptcy. About 60 people attended, a warm and lively mix of family, friends, and the wedding party. The air buzzed with laughter and conversation, and for a while, everything felt right. Then Jack Miller took the microphone. He began his speech with the usual sentimental lines about how proud he was of his daughter and how happy he was to welcome me into the family. Everyone smiled, raised their glasses, and the mood was light and joyful until he said the words that shattered everything. "You know," Jack began, his voice dripping with smug amusement, "Lydia's always been smart about people. She can spot the ones who try to buy their way into feeling important." A few people chuckled politely, not sure where he was going. Then he added, like when someone claims they helped your business, but really just forged a loan application to make themselves look good. Good thing we got smart accountants who caught that nonsense. The room went silent. It felt like every molecule of air had been sucked out of the space. My chest tightened, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. Everyone knew exactly who he was talking about. My mother, my dead mother, who had sacrificed her own comfort to save their family's livelihood. Then Donna laughed. Not a nervous laugh, not out of discomfort, but a full, gleeful laugh, as if her husband had just told the most entertaining joke in the world. A few others joined in awkwardly, thinking it must have been some kind of family inside joke. I turned to Lydia, waiting, hoping for her to speak up, to defend my mother, to tell them to stop. But she just stared down at her plate, silent, expressionless, as though none of it mattered. My hands trembled, but I didn't yell. I didn't cause a scene. That wasn't my style, and my mother had raised me better than that. I simply folded my napkin, placed it neatly on the table, and stood up without a word. I walked out of the restaurant, leaving behind the laughter and clinking glasses that suddenly sounded hollow and cruel. I could hear faint whispers as I reached the door, people wondering what was wrong with the groom. I didn't answer. I just stepped out into the cool Chicago night, the city lights blurring to the tears I refused to let fall, and went back to my hotel room at the Palmer House Hilton, try and make sense of the betrayal that had just destroyed everything I thought I knew. My mind was spinning, but one thing cut to the chaos with perfect, icy clarity. Jack Miller had just publicly accused my late mother of fraud. Not only was it a blatant lie, it was the most vile, soul-crushing thing anyone could have said about her. The woman who had given everything to help his family was being dragged to the mud when she wasn't even alive to defend herself. My chest felt tight as I paced the hotel room, my thoughts bouncing between disbelief, anger, and heartbreak. I wanted to scream, but instead, I focused on breathing, on trying to stay grounded in a moment that felt unreal. That's when I realized I had left my phone at the restaurant. I needed it. Important work emails couldn't wait until after the honeymoon. Reluctantly, I grabbed my car keys and drove back to the quiet Chicago streets, the early hours cloaked in stillness that made my thoughts louder. The restaurant was dark when I arrived. I still had a key. Jack had given it to me a month earlier to help with wedding preparations, so I let myself in, the metallic click of the lock echoing through the empty space. I climbed the stairs to the private dining room, where we'd held a rehearsal dinner, the faint scent of wine and garlic still lingering in the air. My phone was right where I'd left it on the table, but just as I picked it up, I heard voices coming from down the hallway. Jack's office. The door was cracked open, light spilling into the dim corridor. I froze when I recognized the voices. It was Lydia and her mother. Well, at least that settles the whole memorial thing, Donna was saying, her tone smug and satisfied. Now, he can't possibly bring up having some tribute to his mother during the ceremony. Exactly, Lydia replied, her voice calm, almost casual. I was running out of ways to say no without sounding heartless. Dad's little joke tonight should put an end to all that nonsense. I felt my stomach twist. Your father was brilliant, Donna continued, making it sound like she was just some attention-seeking fraud, instead of, well, whatever she actually did. The important thing is that Michael got the message. Lydia's next words hit me like a blade. His mother is not going to be part of our wedding day. This is about us, not some dead woman's legacy. Then they laughed, both of them. It wasn't nervous laughter or guilt-ridden chuckles. It was genuine amusement. Cruel, mocking. I stood in the shadows, frozen in place, my mind struggling to catch up with what I was hearing. It wasn't just that they had approved of Jack's disgusting lie. They had planned it. This entire humiliation had been deliberate, orchestrated to shut me up, to erase my mother's memory from their perfect, polished world. My hands trembled as I picked up my phone, careful not to make a sound. Without looking back, I slipped out through the back door, the cool night air hitting my face like a slap. Inside me, something shifted, something fundamental. The woman I thought I knew, the woman I was supposed to marry in less than 12 hours, was gone. In her place was a stranger, someone deceitful, shallow, and cruel enough to conspire in tarnishing my mother's name. I drove back to the hotel in silence, my thoughts burning with betrayal and clarity. Sleep never came. Instead, I spent the night methodically gathering every piece of evidence my mother had ever saved. Bank statements showing her payments to Northwestern for Lydia's brother's tuition, loan documents with both her and Jack's signatures, email exchanges about the oven purchase, receipts, everything. My mother had been a bookkeeper before she retired, and she believed in records, proof, and accountability. She'd taught me to do the same, and for the first time, I was thankful I'd learned that lesson. By 6 a.m, every document was neatly arranged in a manila folder, chronologically ordered, color-coded, and marked with highlighted notes. If the Millers wanted to manipulate the truth, I was ready to show them the cold, undeniable weight of facts. The wedding brunch was scheduled for 10 o'clock at the restaurant, followed by the ceremony at 2. Both families, all the guests, everyone who mattered would be there, the perfect audience. As I slipped into my charcoal gray suit, the one I'd paid $800 for at Men's Warehouse, I caught my reflection in the mirror. My face looked calm, but my eyes told a different story. I wasn't the same man I'd been last night. I wasn't just a groom anymore. I was my mother's son, and today, the truth would finally be heard. I looked at myself in the mirror and realized this would probably be the last time I'd ever wear this suit. By the end of the day, it would either symbolize the biggest mistake of my life or the most defining moment of it. The reflection staring back at me looked calm, but beneath that surface was a storm of emotion, grief, anger, and an unwavering determination that burned hotter than anything I'd ever felt. When I arrived at the restaurant, everyone was already there, sipping mimosas and chatting over plates of Eggs Benedict. Lydia looked radiant in a cream-colored dress she'd chosen especially for brunch, her laughter ringing through the room like the day before hadn't happened. When she spotted me, she smiled brightly, walked over, and kissed my cheek with that same practiced sweetness. "You feeling better?" she asked lightly. "You left so suddenly last night." "Much better," I said evenly. "Actually, I've never felt more clear about anything in my life." She took that as reassurance, smiling again before turning back to her bridesmaids to fuss over last-minute details. I sat quietly, waiting for the right moment. When everyone had finished eating, I stood, straightened my jacket, and spoke clearly. "Can I have everyone's attention, please?" The chatter faded. Dozens of eyes turned toward me, full of warmth and expectation. Lydia was beaming, no doubt believing I was about to make some heartfelt pre-wedding speech. Jack and Donna wore the same smug smiles they'd worn last night, confident in their performance. I let the silence stretch a little before I began. "I want to thank everyone for being here today," I said, my voice steady and controlled. "It means a lot to have friends and family gather to witness one of the most important moments in a person's life, a moment that should be built on truth, respect, and love." I paused, my words deliberate. However, something happened last night that has forced me to reconsider everything I thought I knew about the people I was about to join my life with. The room began to shift. Lydia's smile faltered, confusion flickering across her face. Jack's expression hardened, and Donna froze mid-sip of her drink. "Last night," I continued, "Jack Miller stood up and made what he called a joke about people who forge loan applications to make themselves feel important. He was talking about my mother, Patricia Thompson, who passed away 8 months ago from cancer." The air grew heavy. The clinking of ice and glasses stopped. You could hear the faint hum of traffic from outside. "Jack accused my mother of fraud," I said slowly, "in front of 60 people. A woman who can't defend herself because she's gone." People shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their earlier cheer replaced with uneasy silence. Normally, I might have tried to excuse it as poor judgment or bad humor. I went on, but then I discovered something that changed everything. I reached for the manila folder sitting beside my plate. You see, after I left the restaurant last night, I came back to get my phone, and I overheard a conversation between Lydia and Donna. They were congratulating each other on Jack's brilliant joke, laughing about how it would finally stop me from wanting to honor my mother during today's ceremony. Lydia's face drained of color. "Michael," she began weakly, "I think you misunderstood." "No," I said sharply, cutting her off. "I understood perfectly. You planned it. All 3 of you. You decided that the best way to shut down my wish to honor my mother was to publicly humiliate her memory and call her a fraud." I opened the folder, pulling out the first document. "This," I said, holding it up, "is a loan application for $70,000 that saved Miller's restaurant in November 2018. You can see both signatures here, Jack Miller and Patricia Thompson. My mother co-signed this loan when 3 other banks had already turned you down." I laid it on the table, then drew out the next paper. "This is my mother's bank statement showing a $15,000 wire transfer to Restaurant Supply Depot for your new industrial oven. December 14th, 2018. Jack stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "Michael, this isn't the time or place." "Sit down, Jack," I said quietly, my tone final. "You had your time to speak last night. Now it's mine." He hesitated, then sank back into his chair. I continued, pulling out more papers. "These are tuition payment receipts from Northwestern University. $28,000 paid by Patricia Thompson for Daniel Miller's senior year. That's your son, Jack, Lydia's brother." Daniel looked mortified, staring down at his plate as if he could disappear into it. "And finally," I said, lifting a small stack of printed emails, "these are exchanges between my mother and Jack. discussing every single one of these transactions. Here's one from December 2018. Jack, I'm happy to help with the oven payment. Family helps family, and I consider you part of our family now. I looked around. Every eye in the room was on me, then on the Millers, then back again. So when Jack stood up last night and called my mother a fraud, I said, my voice tightening, he wasn't joking. He was lying, deliberately, cruelly lying about the woman who saved his family's business and asked for nothing in return but basic respect. Lydia's eyes filled with tears, but I wasn't done. And the worst part, I continued, isn't even the lie itself. It's that my fiancée, the woman I was supposed to marry in 4 hours, not only allowed it but helped plan it. Because apparently, taking 30 seconds to honor my mother's memory during our ceremony was too much of an inconvenience. I closed the folder carefully and looked straight at her. I can't marry someone who would do that, and I won't marry into a family that would do that. So I'm calling off the wedding. The room erupted, people whispering, chairs scraping, voices overlapping. But I didn't stay to listen. I simply turned and walked out, my heart pounding but my conscience finally, blessedly clear. Someone's grandmother was asking what was happening. Jack was shouting something about people taking things out of context, his voice breaking with panic, while Donna was frantically trying to shush him, her face pale and trembling. But the damage was already done. I could see guests throughout the room pulling out their phones, some recording, others typing furiously as if the truth were too urgent to wait. The video of me calmly, methodically presenting document after document that exposed the Miller family's lies, deceit, and sheer ingratitude was spreading online in real time. By that evening, the clips had already amassed more than 50,000 views across different platforms. By the next morning, the story had exploded, trending on Twitter under the hashtag #WantGetTruthBomb. Local Chicago stations picked it up first, then national morning shows, and soon millions of strangers were sharing it. The Millers went into full-blown damage control, but it was far too late. Their restaurant's Google page was flooded with one-star reviews, angry comments, and accusations about the betrayal of the woman who had once saved their business. Jack tried posting a public statement on Facebook, but the comments section became a war zone of outrage and disbelief. Lydia texted me dozens of times that week, pleading, explaining, apologizing, sometimes just begging for a reply. But I was done. The woman I'd fallen in love with 6 years ago either never truly existed or had vanished long ago, replaced by someone capable of laughing at cruelty and dishonoring the dead. 3 months later, I heard from mutual friends that Lydia and her parents had sold the restaurant and moved to Phoenix. The backlash had destroyed their reputation in Chicago, leaving them with no choice but to start over. None of this had been part of my plan. I hadn't wanted revenge or fame. I just wanted the truth to be known, to clear my mother's name before walking away quietly. But life rarely goes the way you imagine. The story became a viral phenomenon, sparking conversations across social media about honesty, family, and integrity. The hashtag #WeddingTruthBomb grew into a movement where people share their own painful experiences, stories of betrayal, selfishness, and finally, freedom. What moved me most wasn't the anger toward the Millers, though there was plenty of that, but the compassion people showed for one another. Strangers from across the country wrote to me, sharing stories about mothers, fathers, grandparents, and friends who had given selflessly without recognition, people who had co-signed loans, paid tuition, covered medical bills, or quietly kept others afloat in their darkest times. One message stayed with me above all the rest. A woman from Denver wrote about her grandmother, who had helped her neighbors avoid foreclosure during the 2008 financial crisis. Years later, that same neighbor publicly called her grandmother a meddling busybody. She told me that after watching my video, she finally found the courage to set the record straight. That's when it hit me. This story was never really about me or even about Lydia. It was about something larger. How we treat those who help us when they expect nothing in return. My mother always said you can tell everything about a person's character by how they treat those who can no longer serve their ambitions. The sick, the elderly, the forgotten, or the dead. The Millers had failed that test spectacularly. I took time off work and drove to Wisconsin to visit my mother's grave, a small plot in a quiet cemetery outside Milwaukee where she'd grown up. I hadn't been back since the funeral, and standing before her headstone, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: peace. Not just sorrow or anger, but true, cleansing peace. I told her everything: the lies, the wedding that never happened, the viral storm that followed, and I knew, deep down, she would have done exactly the same. Patricia Thompson hadn't raised a man who would let the truth be buried. She'd raised a man who would stand for it, no matter the cost. When I returned to Chicago, I found messages from major media outlets: CNN, Good Morning America, podcasts begging for interviews, but I turned them all down. I didn't want to be a symbol or a headline. I just wanted my life back. I moved to a new apartment in Wicker Park, closer to my office and far away from any trace of Lydia or her family. I buried myself in work, took on freelance financial consulting, and began volunteering at a nonprofit helping small business owners manage loans and financial planning. That work brought me closer to my mother than anything else could have. I met people like her, honest, struggling, hopeful. About 6 months after the wedding that never happened, I got an unexpected call. It was Daniel Miller, Lydia's brother, the one whose tuition my mother had secretly paid. His voice shook as he spoke. He said he'd only learned the truth after the video went viral and wanted to make things right. "I'm going to pay it back," he said. "All of it. I'll donate the full $28,000 to a scholarship fund in your mother's name." His sincerity caught me off guard, and that call lasted nearly an hour. He told me the move to Phoenix hadn't helped. The restaurant world was small, and their reputation followed them everywhere. Lydia had changed her last name and was trying to rebuild her life in anonymity. I told him there was no need for further contact. The past had already written its ending. A year later, the Patricia Thompson Memorial Scholarship was born, a fund for business students from families facing financial hardship. Daniel made the first donation, and soon, contributions poured in from strangers who wanted to honor a woman they'd never met. Looking back nearly 2 years later, I know calling off that wedding was the best decision of my life. Not because of the viral fame or vindication, but because it forced me to choose between comfort and integrity. It taught me that people will sometimes betray us in ways we never see coming. But standing up for what's right, especially when it's hard, is what defines who we are. My mother's quiet generosity became her legacy, and in trying to destroy it, the Millers only made it shine brighter.